All right, good evening. Welcome to our Tuesday, July 9th study session. I will have our city clerk start with our roll call.
Mayor Kaylee Clark.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Karen Howe.
Here.
Councilmember Amy Lamb.
Here.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Councilmember Sid Gupta.
Here.
Councilmember Roshino Farrell.
Here.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Lamb, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Councilmember Gupta, will you please read the land acknowledgement statement?
We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Great, thank you. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any questions, comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. First up, we have a David Pyle presentation.
Well, at least I have 6 friends. Well, 7. Did my math wrong? 8. Well. All right. Good evening, City Council. David Pyle, Department of Community Development. I am here tonight to provide your July major projects update. Apologies for not being here on the 2nd and for your flexibility and be able to come tonight to provide the overview. I was with my family all week last week and had a great week. So we have a little bit of a different format for the update tonight. We wanted to provide a few more details on how these projects fit together, given that we are going to see a lot more activity on these as we round up our work with the Planning Commission and you start to see some of the materials be transmitted to you all for your review starting this summer and into the fall. We wanted to focus on clarifying the relationships between the various efforts. There are 2 primary categories for the major policy work that remain in the balance for 2024 and into the spring of 25, either the comprehensive plan related projects or city initiatives. Here you see the timeline of the comprehensive plan related projects versus the town center amendment project. The comprehensive plan related projects are on a timeline governed by the due date for our comprehensive plan set by the Growth Management Act under RCW 3670A 130. Because the comprehensive plan update is due in the end of 2024, these corresponding items are also due at that time. This is a different timeline than that for the town center plan code amendment, which is discretionary on the part of the city and is on its own timeline. That is, the comprehensive plan is mandatory and must be completed in accordance with the timeline provided by state law, while the town center work is an enhancement at the election of the city and is on a city-directed timeline. It is important to keep in mind that the comprehensive plan update process is largely prescriptive, and there are must-haves that go along with it. With each update cycle, there are also themes that generally correspond with a current issue that the state and its counties are facing. With the 2015 update, the theme was environmental quality, and this is evident in the 2015 plan. With this update, there are two predominant themes, housing and climate change, both of which are well entrenched in the current draft of our plan, now under review by the Planning Commission. As for must-haves, some of the high-level requirements are that the updated plan must demonstrate compliance with the Growth Management Act, it must show consistency with the Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050, and it must show consistency with King County countywide planning policies. In fact, there are several formal steps we need to take to present the draft plan to PSRC and to King County, where they provide comment and feedback on if our plan is consistent with their respective policy documents. Ultimately, the city does need formal certification from the Puget Sound Regional Council to complete the update process. We also want to highlight that this is not a complete rewrite, as GMA does not require that we start from scratch with each plan update, nor would that be a productive way to plan for the future as a community. In this way, we first revisit the community planning vision and then revisit the plan and identify where changes are needed. All of this work has been done, and we are now in review of the updated draft plan document, which has been published for Planning Commission and public review. We'd also like to make an attempt to explain the relationship between some of the numbers you've heard related to the city's growth capacity, growth target, housing allocation, and town center plan. We want to highlight that the city does not build housing. While we do have various tools that help guide growth and the type of housing being built, we do not directly produce housing and rely on the building industry. For this reason, although we set goals, we are left with the realities of the housing market. As for the numbers, I'll try my best to break it down. One thing to keep in mind, and as stated directly in the King County countywide planning policies, is that targets create an obligation to plan and provide zoning for future potential growth, but do not obligate a jurisdiction to guarantee that a given number of specific types of housing units will be built during the planning period. So I think it's really important to remember that direct citation from the King County countywide planning policies as we consider these numbers, that really numbers are targets and nothing more. We're really trying to set up our zoning to prove we have capacity for these numbers, but we're not obligated to build it. I think the clarity that a jurisdiction does not have to guarantee that a given number of a specific type of housing units will be built during the planning period is really important to keep in mind. So when looking at these three numbers here, the first thing to keep in mind is that we started this work back in 2019 as we began preparing for this major update cycle. With that, we first started with our urban growth capacity study, where we followed King County guidelines and went through the process of identifying how much capacity we had as a city. That capacity number was then fed into the growth target setting caucus process, which followed the structure of Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050 in the geography categories, where Sammamish is in the cities and towns category. We met with our, I think, 18 counterpart cities as part of that group, and we identified where the roughly 14,000 units of growth that was to be shared across the cities and towns category was to be allocated to. There was some discussion about several attributes, whether it was city size in population, city size in square miles. We also included an attribute with that conversation about access to amenities like state highways and freeways. And all of that fed into each city's growth target that was agreed upon with the group. That was then sent to Puget Sound Regional Council, to the King County Growth Management Planning Council, who then integrated that into King County countywide planning policies, which were ultimately approved by the King County Council. Sammamish did have an iteration of that where we had a smaller target that was due to a sewer moratorium at the time, which took a large portion of the city out of capacity. So we did end up revising that later after the sewer moratorium was lifted and was found to have capacity if interim improvements were put in place. We did then go through that revision process, and we do have a growth target of 2,100 units that was incorporated into the King County countywide planning policies. The timing of this all is very important as well. So the King County countywide, the growth caucus, growth target setting process took place in 2021, which is right about the same time when House Bill 1220 was passed. So it's important to remember that the growth target that the city has and the growth target setting process was already underway as the legislature was under discussion around whether to adopt House Bill 1220 and what exactly House Bill 1220 included. That's important because that middle number, the growth target, then has an influence on the affordable housing allocation. And it is, although it is numerically the same number, it is not the same number. So it's important to remember that the affordable housing allocation comes by way of amendments to RCW 3670A that are from HB 1220. So while King County and the King County Growth Management Planning Council was under discussion to set growth targets for each of the cities, the legislature was at the same time talking about amending the Growth Management Act and the enabling legislation in RCW 3670A to add a new requirement that cities, the state, its counties, and its cities set housing allocations based on a bracketed income groups, as you know, 0 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 80, 80 to 100, 100 to 120. In addition to that, emergency housing numbers. So what happened then is the county, following on to that, went ahead and identified a methodology that was found to be acceptable, where they distributed the housing numbers based on forecasted need and based on existing attributes of each community. So they assessed each community in terms of the numbers of existing units that it had in those bracketed income ranges, and they identified where there was a deficiency, and they then assigned allocations to each city where cities were required to plan for and accommodate those additional units in the different income brackets. So some cities received higher numbers at deeper levels of affordability because they had more market units and more higher income units, if you will. Other cities received higher numbers in the 120 plus units, or 120 plus income bracket range, but with fewer units in the deeper affordability range because they already had a larger share of numbers of units in that income range. The affordable housing allocation is really intended to try to, if you will, set the right environment so that additional units could be produced if the market chose to produce them at those different levels of affordability. The deeper affordability ranges are noted by Department of Commerce, by PSRC, and by King County to require additional public funding, not-for-profit funding, additional assistance, and it's not expected that the market is going to build units that are deeper largely than 50 and below. It's largely expected that 50 and above, the market can produce with some incentives and with the right environment. So what we're saying here is that we're required to plan to a growth target under the GMA, under PSRC's Vision 2050, and under CPPs. We have to set our level of service and our expectation for amenities and other resources as a community towards our growth target. However, we also, ironically, have the same number as an affordable housing allocation that we also have to show that we have capacity to provide, that we've created the right environment should the market want to build it, that they will build it, they could build it, or that if there were public funding to be made available, that it could then be built as well. I want to go back to that statement that it does not obligate a jurisdiction to guarantee that a given number of housing units will be built during that planning period. So I think that's really important to go back to the source, read through it. I was in there today reading through it and found a few citations. I was like, oh yeah, well I remembered these discussions we had years ago. So I'm wanting to come full circle on those and make sure we're all aware of those. So then one other number that's not shown here that comes up also is the town center cap. The town center cap and the town center number is not capacity, it's not a growth target, it's not a housing allocation. That is a number that is used for the purpose of evaluating potential significant adverse environmental impacts. It's a number that was used in an environmental impact statement. So what that does is it says, hey, we've studied 2,000 units under the current plan that we have, and we've found that there's a range of impacts that are acceptable to the decision makers, and we're willing to adopt a plan and code. Knowing what we know, we think that we can mitigate any impacts and that we can have a successful project that will go forward. And what we're saying now is that, as a city, is that we're wanting to investigate whether we can enhance the delivery of diverse and affordable housing with amenities, retail, places to go and shop as a city. And we're willing to consider up to 4,000 units, but we want to study that for the purpose of what range of impacts could come along with that. And that's what the 4,000 number is. It's not a capacity, a growth target, or an allocation. It is a number that we are artificially setting for the purpose of studying what range of impacts could come along with that. If you as a council wanted to turn the dial back to say 3,000 units, and we'll have these conversations here in the next few months, you could choose to do that. We haven't done the EIS work. We've done a lot of the background work, but really at the end of the day, we want to set the preferred alternative with the council as what you think you might be willing to take on. 4,000 was really the outward edge of that. 2,000 is the bottom edge of that because we've already studied it. We already have a plan in place, and we're not going to go lower than 2,000. So I just want to highlight the difference between these numbers. The state, the region, and the county didn't really do us any favors when they created this system where we have a growth target of 2,100 units and a housing allocation of 2,100 units, and it creates a lot of confusion. Okay. Thought I had this worked out, but in addition to the themes described in the prior slides, there are several important changes with this update worth noting. First, as the council is aware, we are shifting from a static future land use map to a future forward land use map that provides a vision for how the city plans to grow over time with a focus on redeveloping already established commercial centers through the establishment of sub-areas. We do want to point out that this is not designed to be in conflict with or competition with the town center, and the way this is set up, the council and community can choose to enable the sub-areas when the time is right. This map simply shows where these are located and identifies that the city will do further planning review on these sub-areas when deemed appropriate. Another major change is the addition of a citywide approach to affordable housing. We have reworked the plan toward creation of an enabling environment that welcomes and facilitates affordable housing, consistent with changes to the GMA and King County countywide planning policies. With this update, we are also adding a new to the city transportation master plan, which is a big improvement in how we approach transportation planning in the city. Finally, we are also adding two new elements, an economic development element and a climate change and resiliency element. While these two elements are great additions, I do want to highlight that there is a distinctive difference between what a comprehensive plan element is versus what an implementation plan is. In this case, the climate change and resiliency element, we're fortunate to have put in the work to complete the climate action plan, which is the implementing plan for that element. However, in the case of economic development element, although that element itself is a good start, we do not have an implementation plan for that element yet developed. We want to make sure to temper expectations on what is included with the addition of the economic development element. Developing this update to the comprehensive plan has been quite a journey. Our work began back in 2019, and we have had a multitude of meetings and outreach events supporting our work on the plan through several phases of work, such as the urban growth capacity work in 2019 and 2020, the first phase of visioning work in 2021, the second phase of visioning work in 2022, and the official kickoff of the comp plan process also in 2022. Over the years, we've had many meetings with the Planning Commission and Council and have hosted a variety of outreach events using different channels and venues with the hopes of reaching a broad audience. We have received council direction and have continued to work under that direction. In addition to public outreach events completed here since we began work on this effort in 2019, We are showing the list of meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council in 2024. We've been working under council direction, and we will be bringing that direction back to the council in the form of a draft comprehensive plan that implements the direction received. We will first introduce the draft to the council in July, actually next week, and we will be publishing the Planning Commission recommended draft in August, following the commission holding public hearing and making recommendation to the council in the end of July. Initially, meetings with the council will start out as work session discussions as part of the scheduled agenda at regular council meetings, where the council can receive public feedback or comment and ask questions about the draft and make suggested edits or changes. Later, towards the end of the year, the council will switch gears and hold a public hearing on the draft with adoption scheduled by the end of the year. One of the themes of this update cycle is housing. One of the methods in which housing is being addressed is through incorporation of middle housing policy and the creation of a middle housing zoning overlay. The middle housing overlay creates a new set of zoning controls that helps facilitate the development of middle housing types across the city. The Planning Commission has been working to carefully find balance with the creation of new development regulations that apply to middle housing. While the city must allow middle housing under HB 1110, and the city cannot create zoning controls for middle housing that are more restrictive than for single family, we do have the ability to appropriately set restrictions on middle housing for things like bulk and scale of buildings. However, there are other areas where we cannot restrict middle housing, such as tree retention, critical areas, setbacks, and heights. One thing to keep in mind is that, like all housing in the city, it is market-driven. Just because it is allowed does not mean that it will be prolific or even that it will be built. Based on the research we have seen from the building community, or based on the reaction we've seen from the building community, and based on reports from other jurisdictions, we do not see this as something that we will be overrun by in the near future, and it may take some fine-tuning to get the right level of facilitation incorporated into zoning controls so that it's actually built. Another item that comes with the periodic update of the comprehensive plan is an update to the city's critical areas regulation. This update is due in the end of 2024 alongside the comprehensive plan. State law dictates that the update follow a prescriptive framework centered around the use of best available science. One significant change with this update is how geohazards are regulated, with a shift in focus to regulating properties by actual attributes, not perceived attributes, or simply because something is shown on a map in a certain way. We are also bringing back habitat regulations that were somehow diminished in 2014 when the rules were last updated. Generally, the city's critical areas rules were found to be in great shape, and only modest changes are proposed with the draft currently under review by the Planning Commission, who will hold a public hearing on the proposed draft at their next meeting on July 18th. We're also excited to bring forward the addition of a transportation master plan with this comprehensive plan update cycle that is reflective of the current council direction. This is a great addition to the city's portfolio of planning documents and consolidates transportation planning for the city. I understand the council heard from my public works counterparts regarding the TMP efforts at the last council meeting, so I don't need to spend much time on this one. Yet another project that is carried forward with the comprehensive plan update is the permit process streamlining project in response to SB 5290. This is primarily a code and administrative process improvement effort targeted at shortening permit timelines by removing subjective standards, and will be brought forward as part of the comprehensive plan code update package later this fall. Finally, the town center plan and code amendment project continues to move forward as a separate project from the comprehensive plan and as an enhancement to the work the city is doing to promote diverse and affordable housing. It is important to note that the town center is by no means meant to absorb or take all the city's affordable housing allocation. And in fact, we don't need the town center amendment work in this regard. Although the town center does play a role in our compliance under HB 1220, the town center plan and code amendment work is not being done in response to the comprehensive plan update. Rather, the town center amendment work is being done outside of the comprehensive plan as an enhancement to help improve the delivery of different housing options. Along with housing work, we also want to highlight that the town center amendment work is intended to help provide diverse and affordable housing types along with retail and services, places to go and things to do. This is a component of community design sought after by Sammamish residents as reinforced through the survey results. We will be coming back to the City Council to deliver a project update at the next City Council meeting on July 16th. Looking ahead, we wanted to outline how we anticipate we will wrap up 2024 and kick off 2025. As the comprehensive plan work winds down and hopefully achieves PSRC certification, we will continue to work on amendments to the town center plan and code into 2025. In 2025, we also anticipate we will have a few policy and code amendment projects to take on, and we anticipate further conversation on the 2025 work plan over the coming months as we sketch out what work we are required to take on under state law, what work must be done as essential to the city, and what work we would like to take on as aspirational. That's it for the project updates, and I'm here to answer any questions the council may have.
Great, thank you. Council. Councilmember Trine.
So the review has okay, so the comprehensive plan update was sent for review, and has it come back?
Yes, so the comprehensive plan, we actually just sent the comprehensive plan off to King County for their review. We actually had an intake meeting with the county this morning, and they're going to be taking that on, and they anticipate providing a comment back in the middle of August to the city. So fortunately, we'll have that back and be able to provide that to the council so you can see what comments are being made by King County staff who staff the Affordable Housing Committee. Ultimately, what happens is they review our plan, they make some comments or suggestions, we tell them whether or not we can accommodate those edits or show them where alternatively we've addressed the issue. They then make their recommendation to the King County GMPC Affordable Housing Committee, who ultimately then sends a formal letter to the city regarding consistency with King County countywide planning policies. Within the King County countywide planning policies, there is a framework for their review. It includes 5 main points, things that they look for, not terribly complicated. We do note that as you review the comprehensive plan, that you're going to want to pay attention to. There are some things in there when we're going to say, this language is really important that we retain as it is. I've learned over the years in working with agencies that look for consistency that sometimes they want to see their language in your plan. So there are points where we're going to say, yeah, we'd love to wordsmith that, but we really think we should just keep this one as is because it really is important to that other agency to see that there's consistency. So be ready for that when we get to the point where we're talking about the individual policies and those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Howe.
Thank you. And thanks, David, for that excellent explanation on the numbers. And I'm wondering if it was inspired by some of the confusion that I heard from the Planning Commission, who asked a series of questions about those numbers. And I thought your explanation was really clear, distinct, and wondering where else we can have that appear. Okay.
So we're working on some FAQs that we're planning to publish to the website and make sure are available as, linked into agenda bills and things. When you think about it in the timeline of how this stuff unfolded, it's easier to understand. The growth targets were already being set while HB 1220 was being written.
Well, there's that, and then there's language problems, target.
Right.
Just case in point. Yeah. So, or goal. It seemed like any piece of language you used to wrap around the number became problematic and pejorative. So thank you for doing this work, and I'm looking forward to seeing where else we can intersperse these details so that we can eliminate as much confusion as possible.
Thank you.
All right, council, anyone else? Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, thanks, David. You talked about, with the middle housing and, with there being a nationwide, actually a worldwide crisis, as I understand it, on that type of housing. And you talked about how we can't have any policies that would be more restrictive. But can you talk a little bit, or maybe now is not the right time, but I'm assuming that part of the work that we're doing, and the really hard part of the work that we're doing, is figuring out how do we encourage the middle housing or incentivize the middle housing to happen, as opposed to finding ways to prevent it.
Yeah, so the work the Planning Commission's doing, and if you watch the meetings, the Planning Commission, one of the great things is they're not always in alignment. They have very robust debates about the right sizing of things. And where they landed was facilitating it. They definitely want to facilitate it, but they want to make sure that the bulk and scale that they get is not so disproportionate to the neighborhoods that it really stands out. There definitely would be a, major increase in the amount of square footage, but how do you deal with the right size footprints of buildings? How do you deal with parking, right? And there were a lot of debate about on-street parking versus on-site parking. And one of the things we came across was that not every street in the community in Sammamish is the same. Some streets in Sammamish have on-street parking. Some streets definitely don't. So really trying to set a standard that is responsive to existing actual conditions to help facilitate these things. So when on-street parking is available and you can show that there's adequate parking, that we could waive parking requirements, for example, to help facilitate it.
Yeah.
Walkability is also important. So if you're within a quarter mile of a current or planned transit route, perhaps you could waive the parking requirement there as well. So there's different things we're considering with the Planning Commission at this point.
Aren't there restrictions from the state that we can't actually use parking as a way to? So I think we need to be very careful about parking requirements, because we're supposed to be looking to, I think, reduce the burden of parking from preventing middle and affordable housing from being built. Isn't that correct?
Right. So there's a range and there's sort of a dial, right? Mm-hmm. There's a maximum number of parking spaces that we can require, right? And then you turn the dial back and you can cut that down. You can cut it down again, and the state law allows us to do that. But the state law sets what the maximum is. There's also another issue where we're trying to address, working through things like where if you have tree retention that would preclude on-site parking from occurring because you'd have to move the building or make a project infeasible and an applicant has to show it. There's a state law now that says you have to waive the parking.
Okay,
Right.
and then you talked a little bit about footprint, but we have some pretty robust, I would say, development requirements that address footprint ratios to lot sizes, and we also have a lot of height requirements. So is there more that the Planning Commission is looking at trying to do? Because I feel like we did a pretty good job of that in our last round of development code updates.
Right. So what the Planning Commission did was we walked through all the different range of options of tools, and we selected the tools that they wanted to use to help facilitate middle housing. Mm-hmm. So things like floor to area ratio going from a 0.5 FAR to say a 0.65 to a 0.9 FAR, depending on the number of units you're building under middle housing. That's a good example. They're looking at different setback scenarios. They're looking at lot coverage, different lot coverage scenarios that ultimately allow, that facilitate middle housing. Okay. Right.
So they're looking at like, hey, we have these requirements. Are there things we can do to sort of, as you call it, dial them back a little bit to help to encourage or enable that from happening? And that's where I think you're talking about making sure that when you dial that back, you don't get unexpected or unintentional results. Is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And
okay.
One way to think about it is you want to first figure out what the tool is you want to use, and then you want to figure out how to calibrate the tool and set it. What is the right setting on the tool? Because if we keep getting caught in these cross conversations, you end up really not ultimately understanding what the box you're building is. So you really want to focus when you work through these on what is the tool and what is the setting, and then looking collectively at all of them and what they ultimately facilitate and allow versus restrict, right? There's different ways to use these tools.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate your work here.
Thank you.
And all of staff, not just you.
It's a team effort. It's
Thanks.
across the city, so.
Councilmember Gupta?
Yeah, thank you, David. And at the last Planning Commission meeting, they were talking about the 4,000 number, and I think they referred to it quite a lot as a horizon, and I think that really helped me wrap my arms around that. So I appreciate this presentation, which laid out the 2100 and the 2100, because that's where a lot of my confusion is stemming from. I feel like I do understand it better, so I really appreciate that, and I hope we can push that out to the community, as Deputy Mayor Howe said. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Awesome. We'll see you in a week.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. All right. Next up is our presentation on the racial equity commitment and vision document.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. My name is Nyambura Rohio, and I am the lead for this team. I'll have the team introduce themselves. But we are here and are very excited to share the significant stride that Sammamish City Council has made in promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, commonly referred to as DIB.
Next slide. So I'm Michelle Arab with Parks, Recreation, and Facilities, and I'm co-leadership liaison with NIEM.
Good evening, Rachel Bianchi with the City Manager's Office. I also want to take an opportunity to introduce two of our members who are not able to be here today. Sandra Casillas is with Community Development and Mung Franklin with Administrative Services.
I'm Krista Kilsmeyer with the City Clerk's Office.
Lacey Lewis, Admin Services.
Cindy Schaff, Admin Services. And I'd like to introduce our consultant, Scott Wynn, who is a racial equity consultant supporting nonprofit and government entities in operationalizing racial equity efforts in order to improve outcomes for all. He is a member of the faculty of the University of Washington School of Social Work and is an affiliate trainer with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity.
Next slide, please. In 2022, we established a clear and ambitious DEIB goal, encapsulated it in the City Council Resolution 2022-963. This resolution affirms Sammamish as a welcoming community that values diversity, equity, justice, and human rights for all. Our commitment is to create an environment where all employees, contractors, elected officials, and appointed board and commission members uphold and reflect this community value. To initiate this journey, we provided implicit bias and started teaching on awareness training for all our staff. This training aimed to help staff recognize and address the unconscious bias, fostering a more inclusive and equitable workplace. In 2023, we expanded our training efforts to include the City Council, Board, and Commission, and the leadership team. We were fortunate to have Benita Hahn in a respected expert in racial equity lead with this training. This training was designed to deepen our understanding of racial equity principles and equip our leaders with the tools to promote inclusive and equity in their respective roles. Another major milestone in 2023 was the creation of the Racial Equity Team. This team is tasked to address systemic racial inequities within our community and organization. This work involves reviewing all policies, practices, procedures, and ensures that all are equitable and inclusive for all. Next slide, please. The future vision is ongoing commitment. These initiatives are just the beginning of our commitment to the racial equity and is going to be evolving. We will continue to assess our progress, learn from our experiences, and make necessary adjustments to our strategies. Our goal is to create a community where everyone feels valued, respected, empowered to contribute their unique perspectives and talents. My closing remarks. I encourage everyone to embrace this value and take part in our racial equity initiative. Together, we can build a more inclusive, equitable, and welcoming Sammamish for all. Thank you for your attention and commitment to this vital cause.
Next slide, please. So what is racial equity? Equality and equity are sometimes used interchangeably, but actually convey significantly different ideas. Equity isn't about fairness. Equity is about fairness. Equality is about sameness. Racial equity is when race can no longer be used to predict life outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. When systems and structures are not working well, they are often not working well for most people. Racial equity means that race cannot be used to predict success, and we have successful systems and structures that work for all. Next slide.
We had extensive discussion as a team about a shift from a DEIB committee to one focusing on racial equity. Does this shift prioritize one area of this work and neglect others? No. Leading with racial equity benefits us all, as solving for racism solves for everyone. Some examples follow on the next slide.
What does leading with racial equity mean? Some examples where leading with racial equity is beneficial is affordable housing. If we use how leading with race would work in an affordable housing program, it doesn't mean that we aren't focused on the broad community of the most economically burdened. It means we are making sure that the program can support and uplift economically burdened residents of color, solving for race, but their success will also mean the success of other members of the community. Another example would be contracting and bidding. It is putting policies and procedures into place in accordance with state law that remove barriers for people of color, which will then remove barriers for all people. Another example would be hiring practices. Leading with race when updating hiring practices makes sure our hiring, promotion, and retention efforts support people of color and ensure success for everyone else, whatever their race, gender, ability, nationality, religion, economic status, and/or sexual orientation. Next slide, please.
What will be achieved? Racial inequity is a systematic issue rooted in politics and practices across different governmental systems. It affects every aspect of our society. By focusing on racial equity, we aim to break down these systematic barriers and create more inclusive, effective, and just civic systems that better serve everyone. As a city, we have the ability to make profound impacts through civic access and service delivery. Next slide. So, why are we creating a racial equity commitment and vision? This document will guide the city in its equity work and defines a shared commitment. Similar to a comprehensive plan or master plan, the racial equity commitment and vision document is meant to lead our efforts in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It's intentionally aspirational as we move forward with this work. Next slide.
So here's the actual draft document that this group put together. It is just one page long, and it really starts with kind of a shared vision and a shared commitment and a shared understanding of why leading with race is important. And one of my colleagues, Michelle, really talked about the systemic realities of racism in our culture and in all of our systems, right? Government is one of those systems, but all of the systems. Key to our work here is that it also identifies 4 different areas where we would then develop a work plan and work to change things here in the city of Sammamish. So as I think all of you know, I've done this work in other jurisdictions as well. I've found this process to be very helpful, that we all have a shared roadmap of where we're going, right? And where the areas that we want to focus are. So in this case, this group is proposing that we focus on leadership, operations, and services, workplace, workforce, budgets, plans, and policies, and then outreach, community engagement, and partnerships. So what this does is, back to that roadmap, it allows us to say, okay, where do we want to go? And as I believe you all know, this work is hard. This work takes time. Everybody up here has a professional role in the city of Sammamish doing something else, right, besides this work. And we want to be thoughtful, and we want to change the world. I've told all of you that's why I'm in local government, right? It's because I believe that we get to change the world. But we need to do it carefully, thoughtfully, and we need to do it in a way that really does change things. So the way I've seen this work best is over a full year period of time, you're picking 3, maybe 4 things to do, right? And those things are things like reviewing your hiring practices, from job description to promotion and retention, right? And identifying some things that you could change in that process. Another opportunity for us to look at is developing a racial equity toolkit, which is really just a system. It's a set of questions that makes the project manager, whomever it is, just sit back and think, Who's being burdened by this project or program? Who's not? Who's benefiting, right? How much funding is going in? That sort of thing. So those are a couple of examples of things that this team could accomplish or could start working towards as a part of this vision. But as a city, as an organization, we really need that direct roadmap so we all know that we're going in the same direction. Next slide, please.
So here's a timeline of next steps. If the council agrees with this strategy, we will return next week to seek confirmation by council through resolution of the commitment and vision document. This will allow us to operationalize racial equity work for the city. Should council approve the resolution, then we would embark on the next steps that are, you can see here on this slide. Next slide.
Thank you for your time. With that, we'd like to invite any questions you may have.
Great, thank you, Council. Deputy Mayor Howe.
Thank you for your work on this, and I would love to know what challenges you've confronted and what unexpected things have you learned through this process? Because you guys have been meeting now for how long?
For a year and a half now.
Wow, okay, that's a lot of time to invest in this, which I appreciate that because it's clearly going to pay off, I think, for us in the long run. But I'd love to know kind of what learnings you've gotten and what kind of unexpected challenges you've run into.
So I'll begin by saying that we are first were engaged in 2023. We got the training from Scott Wynn. We also got some training on the implicit biases. And then Benita came in and taught some of the classes. Some of us were not involved in those steps. And when the team was formed, we all had divergence on what this work will entail. And it took a lot of time to all agree that racial equity was the way we wanted to lead with this work. So we appreciate you all listening to this and understand that it took a long time to make this decision. Thank you. And I can ask Michelle to add something more if you have something.
Yeah, I did want to kind of broadly talk about why we want to lead with racial equity and why I personally feel like we should lead with racial equity. This was a question that I struggled with myself. It took me a little time to understand what it meant to lead with racial equity and why it's important. But I believe it is the best way to move forward. Each of us approach this work with our own perspectives. For me, I tend to see this work through my perspective as a multiracial woman and a child of an immigrant. But clearly there are so many other perspectives to consider. That is why it's so important to bring different people from different perspectives and experiences together. But that's also why it's challenging. But whatever our personal experiences or perspectives are, we have to acknowledge that racial discrimination in our country has been systematic, violent, and pervasive in a way that is just not the same for other groups that fall within diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because race is the first thing you see. You can't hide that you're Black. By focusing on diversity broadly, we risk overlooking the most discriminated groups in our community. None of us want to exclude anyone. We want to make the city of Sammamish a better place for all. And we believe to do that, you need to focus on race. Yes, and Lacey, please.
To also speak to your question, I really appreciate that question, first of all. And just like my team members have said, I think at the beginning there was a struggle because we weren't really sure. You know, to plan the plan, I think is always the hardest part. So to create the North Star, to create where we're going, we had to really figure out where we were just as a group. And that, of course, was challenging, right? Because just like Michelle stated, we're all from different places, we're all from different perspectives, and we're all very passionate about what we're passionate about. So I'm forever grateful to Scott Wynn, who is just an incredible facilitator. He just did a great job with us and was patient with us, and I really appreciated just getting to learn more about my team members through those discussions, because there were a lot of meetings that it was just a lot of getting to know each other and talking as well, because how do you sort of get ready to do this work without really understanding why we were all there to do the work? So really appreciate the question, and there were lots of challenges, but I'm really glad that we are kind of on the other side of now getting to show the plan and then looking forward to what new challenges await us in this work.
Quick follow-up, and it has to do with your facilitator. And I'm wondering if you're going to be using Scott's services going forward. Are you a check-in point for people, Scott, or what is your relationship going forward?
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be in front of you. I really appreciate the chance to support your leadership in doing this work and really furthering your resolution from 2022. I definitely am kind of a jack of all trades. I'm going to be providing training and workshops to really support that kind of aligning around this strategy of leading with racial equity and the concepts around that. And then I provide ongoing consulting and coaching with individuals, particularly leaders, who really want some support around how do I enact this? Being a leader in this work is a very different thing than being a frontline staff. And a leadership team did a training last week for the leadership team of the city to really support them in getting tooled up on this before we train all the staff, so that they can lead this effort and not be led towards it by their staff. And I definitely am going to be supporting what Rachel talked about, the racial equity toolkit. That is a best practice in cities to really have a way to operationalize this lens so we can really change outcomes and get the work done. So that's a bit of the work I'm going to be doing.
Councilmember O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everyone, so much for your work and developing this important North Star document. I'm excited to see this come through. So thank you for this year and a half work, and I know it's not easy work, and we're all brought to kind of confront personal issues as well as kind of a lived experience. And part of my lived experience is about neurodiversity and the inclusion of those of us with disabilities, those with physical and developmental disabilities, which are very much can be seen right off the bat too. So race is all, it can be seen, but also can someone's disability. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this document develops, how this work develops, and how we can do some more work around neurodiversity inclusion and hiring practices too. So we consider that when we're developing these systems, and about supported employment. I have to give a shout out for that. I know there's lots of residents in Sammamish who I know would be supportive of this too. So I think of neurodiversity, and I think of the hiring practices that we use to employ our young people coming out of school to work programs who have autism, who have all kinds of different neurodevelopmental diagnoses. So I'm so pleased to see this work begin, and I know this is a place to begin, and we're going to start and kind of add to it, and I look forward to hearing more information about this. So thank you, and that we can keep neurodiversity front of our mind too also as we go forward, I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
What else, Council? Councilmember Lamb.
So thank you for the presentation. I very much support this very important work. Institutional bias is real. I have been affected by systemic racism in my career. I understand when you say that historically, racism can be traced back to racial bias. You think of all the federal policies that existed, redlining and zoning, which affected millions of Black people and still affect them because they weren't able to accumulate generational wealth. I understand that from like a broad perspective from the country. When I think about us in Sammamish, though, and we think about racial equity, I tend to get a little bit more nuanced, maybe it does need to be more nuanced. We are very diverse here, but I think one of the big factors here is that we have very wealthy people here. We have the highest median household income of over $200,000 in a household, and there's a lot of people here that don't make that amount. And I'm very conscious of that in many of the decisions that we make. Last year, we had a fiscal sustainability commission, and we were looking at policies at, how can we raise more revenue? And for me, one of the issues was that there wasn't a lot of consideration, that there were a lot of people that, raising taxes would greatly affect them. That isn't a racial equity thing, it's a socioeconomic. It affects people with different income levels. So when I see the title, Leading with Racial Equity, and I brought this up with our city manager in a small group, that and this is me personally, don't believe that it can just be the word racial equity. I think the word race it's a hot button, just that word. My preference is to change that word with leading with inclusion. If that's not desirable, I would very much prefer it to say leading with racial equity and support for underserved communities. I took a look at some of the other cities, and I also took a look at what we were doing on a federal level, and President Biden, that was one of the first executive orders that he issued when he became president, was an executive order on racial equity and supporting and support for underserved communities, which includes people from the LGBTQ community, people that are of different socioeconomic levels, people that have disabilities. So that is really my feedback, is to really consider the title, is to be more inclusive of everybody, and it's not just about race. Thanks.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I think on that note, I want to thank you all for doing this work and for your very thoughtful and passionate statements at the opening. My question or my concern about the title, I don't disagree with your approach. I don't disagree that if we solve, as I tried to write down some of the quotes that you guys had, but that solving for racial equity solves for all. I don't disagree with any of those approaches. I think my concern around the title alone is, will it draw unnecessary backlash? Because the work you're doing isn't just solving for racial equity, right? We know that if we can solve for that, because that is probably the hardest and the most deeply rooted, that by solving for that, all the others are solved for. And that is clear, I think, to all of us. But for those who only look at the title, are we asking for people to, kind of hate on it, right? And I'm just going to use that word because I think that's really what that backlash might be rooted in. And so is there any merit in broadening the title, not necessarily changing the work you're doing or the scope of the work or your North Star, but to just make it clear from the title that the intention of solving for racial equity is to solve for all, even if we just added, right, solving for racism creates equity for all, or solving for racism solves for all, or any of those. All of these were statements that you guys had said, right? Racial equity for better outcomes for all. I know those are all big mouthfuls, but I'm wondering, are there other jurisdictions that have done this work and used titles that only focused on racial equity, and what was the response to those, if we know? Because I fully support and really appreciate the deep work that you guys are doing, and I can only imagine one of the things that people probably don't realize is that when you dive into this work, it can be really hard and painful. It can be painful for the things you have to think about, maybe the experiences you dredge up, and maybe even some of the feelings that get dredged up around the room. So I really, really appreciate the work here. But I do want to, I don't want to say shield, but I want to ensure that we don't provoke responses unnecessarily from people that might distract from the amazing work you're doing. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that, just again from a titling perspective.
Thank you for that question. Scott, if you could answer to our council member.
Yeah, I'd love to. I love this question. I love this conversation around, what's to be done. I think we all agree there's a problem. There's all work to be done, and how to do it is the conversation. And I do think that leading with racial equity, it's a strategic consideration. It's not, as we talked about, it's not about playing the oppression Olympics and having decided that racism is the worst or it was the first. It's about what's it going to take to get us all, everyone across the finish line. And I like, the statement that the committee came up with. The second line does say to ensure that everyone in Sammamish can grow, excel, and thrive. So I think that's out there and that's clear. And as was shared, I'm an affiliate trainer with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, which you may know you all are a member of. And it's a national network of over 500 jurisdictions that are really working and struggling with these questions of how to do racial equity work to benefit everyone. And you're right, there are people, I'm sure you all know as council, every decision you make, not everyone's happy, right? So I'm sure you all are really adept in dealing with folks who disagree with your decisions. And what I also hear you saying is, how can you deal with the disagreement in a way which brings people along and creates more and more conversation? I do agree with, which I think what Councilmember Lamb said, it's a hot button issue. Until we take it on and build the skills communities to talk about it, it's going to remain so hot that we can't talk about it and can't get anything done about it, right? So I do think it is the best practice across the country to really take it on and recognize that if we have a historical understanding of our society, that's what we need to do. The work you all are doing, this document here, the document I shared was Bainbridge Island's document. Bainbridge Island is pretty similar in many ways, different, but in many ways to Sammamish. And they are really have taken this step as well to lead with racial equity. So I've been really curious to get council members there, the racial equity team here together to strategize and lessons learned around how both communities, which have some parallel similarities, are doing this work. So that's kind of my opening thoughts.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. And again, I don't disagree with anything in the document, right? It isn't about the approach or the document at all. It's really about for the 95% of the people that are only ever going to look at the title, maybe it's 98%, is the title descriptive enough? And maybe it's as simple as taking that line that you said and making it the subtitle, right? So that it's, kind of like books sometimes have a title and a subtitle, so that it's clear to the community who may only be perusing titles that the work you're doing is just that. It is solving for all, that you're taking on the hardest piece, and once we solve for the hardest piece, everything else kind of works itself out. I think I'm probably overly simplifying, but I think that's really, kind of what I heard you guys summarize. So again, I don't disagree with any of that. I just want to make sure that we can convey that to the community through the title, and that the title doesn't evoke a backlash that will distract us from the important work. So appreciate all of that, Scott, and completely default to you and the committee here on the work, just trying to shield us from unnecessary backlash if we think that that's a problem. So I guess the question from like these other jurisdictions, Scott, that you work with, has anyone titled their work simply, racial equity, or have they had broader titles even if the focus of their work has gone in this direction?
Yeah, I would say, I think, you can find an example of every possible title across the country, right? I do think that there is a benefit to perhaps saying racial equity commitment vision to benefit all. I think there's no problem with that. I do think we want to make sure that the racial equity stays on the table, or else it always falls off the table.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And I do think there is a way where no matter what you all do, the same folks who would resist the racial equity are probably going to resist whatever we do, right? And so I think it would be really smart for the racial equity team to really come up with a one-page document of speaking points, how to talk about this, how to unroll this or roll this out so that you're taking on the possible things people may say in the initial messaging, right?
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
A quick question. I was thinking that the audience for this document is internal. Is that correct?
Rachel, if you could. The work that, the large amount of work that we will be doing is internal. So yes, but it is also, I mean, you all adopting this via resolution, to use our collective boss's term, is planting the flag, right? It really is. And that is part of what we are suggesting, that we plant the flag around racial equity, again, so that we can work for all. And I think that this group, we've been working a lot together. I think I can say that we'd be happy to go back and look at a subtitle or something to better reflect that, because that is truly what we're doing. But much of the work that we'll be doing will be internal. However, it will have external benefits.
Right.
Right?
That's the intent, is to have external benefit. So what I'm thinking is that the caution that you're hearing from some members may not be as necessary. There's a certain aspect to the fact that you're talking to staff and family, I mean, internally to start with, which in a way is a safe place, or a safer place potentially. I'm more comfortable with it because I've been doing the work that I do, where we always lead with racial equity. It is just what we do with CASA and support of foster children, because if you didn't lead with race, it would be disingenuous. It would be problematic, and basically denying so much lived experience. So I'm more comfortable with it, but then I've been more used to it because I've been trained in this for a while, because I had to. So I'm wondering, just how others feel.
If I could just quickly echo what Scott Wynn said earlier, and having done this work in other places, and to be honest, not being in a place maybe that was quite ready to plant the flag and so didn't use leading with race, that backlash is still going to come, right? So I like Scott's idea of making sure that we, as the committee, are providing you with resources in terms of talking points and things like that. But regardless of what we call it, I just want all of us to acknowledge that there will be pockets of the community, and there will be pockets of the organization, because the organization also reflects the community in many ways, right? This work is hard, so that's why we should do it, and that's why we should plant the flag.
Councilmember Gupta?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for all the work you've put into this. I think we've all acknowledged how challenging this is. Systemic inequality is not necessarily malicious, right? You can just see something happening and say, "Oh, that's the way it is," and not think about the consequences. So that's why this work is so important. We need to be able to trust that our systems are in place, and taking care of the whole of our community. Just for me, in terms of messaging, I think the idea of targeted universalism was very powerful. If we can kind of stick to that, or if we can plant the flag for that phrase, just the idea that we design for the most vulnerable or the people that are most in need. For me, the transit example is useful. If you're someone who doesn't have a car, who doesn't have access to personal transportation, you want to design the transit system so that they can get where they need to go. And if you design a fast, safe, efficient transit system for them, turns out you have a fast, safe, efficient transit system for everybody. So I think that to me really spoke to the way we can communicate this maybe to the community, because this is challenging for all of us. Obviously, it's going to be challenging for the community. So thank you again.
Councilmember Tree, I don't know if you have anything before I go.
I probably have a lot of things to say about this issue, but I'll limit my comments to a couple of things. One, the title for me is fine. And the reason why I say that is because your first sentence pretty much covers, that it's who the document's for is really within, and then it's going to be pushed out to the community that we serve. So I think you kind of nailed it right there with what you're trying to accomplish as leaders in this particular very challenging message that you're going to be delivering and the changes that need to take place. And that's where the hard work comes in. And so that's what leads me down to my next part was, because I like your strategy, by the way. It reminds me of something that I've seen in the past work really well for 12 years. So is your last paragraph there where it says to achieve these outcomes, the city will adopt and implement a racial equity work plan. So is that already started? Is that something that's like your first call of order?
When you pass this resolution, that's going to be the first call of order.
That's that first, okay, perfect. Yeah, because then the rest of it, the next 3 sentences makes perfect sense then to me. So yeah, I think move forward, bring it, and I kind of hope that this is the language that comes to us in the resolution, that what I'm reading here is what we're going to see, and then we move forward. Thank you.
Great. Well, this is awesome. I'm really excited. I've done a lot of stuff. I work for Sound Transit, and they go for the anti-racism strategy. And so I don't know if that's obviously something I'm sure you've all explored and looked at. I'm really excited about the title, that it says it's a commitment. So it's not just like, the vision, the pie in the sky thing, but it's an actual commitment for racial equity. So I think that's super important. I'm really excited about this work. I really like the vision statement. I like that it is 1 page, even though you use the tiniest margins to make it fit. I love it. This is great. I'm really excited for it. There's nothing I would change personally. I do kind of understand where others are coming from, but I really do like Councilmember Gupta's, what would you call that, metaphor kind of thing with the transit use. So yeah, I'm really excited, and thank you all for your work. I think so. I didn't know if the other 2 were missing, but you all are coming back. Well, if it passes by resolution next week, I saw a January, annual report coming up.
So when it passes, we will be able to provide to you what the timeline is going to look like. For right now, we wanted to make sure that we are doing it step by step. So we'll come back to you next week, and then we'll be able to give a follow-up after that.
Yeah, I don't know if we could have like a David Pyle check-in, quarterly check-ins or something. I mean, it'd be awesome to just kind of hear how it's going, or if you need anything else from us, because I think it's really exciting.
I think at the very minimum, we would see an annual check-in.
Awesome.
And we can explore more as well.
Cool. Oh, Scott?
I wasn't going to say anything.
Sorry, Scott McCall. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't even realize.
We do that a lot.
There we go. Red light wasn't on. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to all of you for sending us on this path. I think your initial resolution back in 2022 was a strong statement and really kicked this off. I think that for those that were with the city prior to that, without that sort of strong statement from council, it was a little hard to figure out what we were about. And I think it's really important. We talk about the community and we talk about the work that the city is doing, but I think we also have to talk about the staff that are here in the building. And so if I may, I want to take a second to thank the team that is here for a lot of really hard work. I know we're not done, but I think this group has done some incredibly heavy lifting on a really hard topic. And I think as we move forward, we are hopeful to get more folks involved within staff. But I think that this group is really a shining example of those willing to step forward and take on some really hard work. And part of that is really reflective of how we are as an organization and who we attract to try to come work here. I think this makes a big difference. I think as we move forward and as we recruit, this is one of the things that we can point to that make us, that have the city stand out. And the team didn't say it, but in all honesty, we've got to get our internal house in order before we can start to change our outside world. And so this group has done a lot of work to go down that path. I'm incredibly proud of the work that they've all done and very appreciative. Rachel was alluding to, my statement was planting the flag. And I think this is really critically important. We have come a long way in a short time period, and this is really setting the foundation for the future and our future work. And so I want to say thank you to all of you for considering leading us on this path and coming back next week and hopefully council adopting the resolution to continue our work.
Great, and yeah, thank you for all being leaders in this, because I think that says a lot too. Probably you volunteered, I assume, to do this. So yeah, thank you all. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, council. I think last we have public comment. Okay, Mary.
Good evening, Council. Mary Wichter, lived in Sammamish for 24 years. Really great presentations. I was glad I attended both. I think the work is really important and your questions are excellent. I had emailed in 2 things on steep slopes and geologically hazardous areas. The critical areas originally were done in 2003, a little bit in 2005. They kind of fumbled through some problems they were having in 2012, 13, and then by 13, there had been enough landslides and real problems. There was deleterious discharges, meaning really unhealthy for people downhill. So there are 5 emergency surface water ordinances that occurred, and the city was forced to adopt new code because they were using 1998 code for far too long. So the first day of 2017 was the day we had more sanity with stormwater. Critical areas and stormwater need to work together. If you have any sort of slope and you're putting water onto or into the soils, you can create a landslide hazard area out of something that is a stable, steep slope or even just a regular slope. And you can create a landslide hazard area of something that doesn't have any critical areas on it. So I'm going to speak to that a little bit. These are the maps that the city did in the 5 emergency surface water ordinances, and I sent different copies of those. I did kind of fix this one because Inglewood and Tamarack actually do touch right here. So Inglewood is just north. And the reason these are historic plats is there's a whole bunch of little lots that already exist. There was never a subdivision to create them. They were platted either on a paper plat of 1 page or they were done by survey. Comprehensive subdivision regulations were not around until 1969. So these really are unique areas in this city. They were having huge problems. I believe somebody else from Inglewood has been writing in as well, because those haven't gone away. Having some of the code changes that we have has helped. And since there wasn't a steep slopes map, it was just done by definition. In the comprehensive plan from 2015, they'd printed it. It was gray, but it didn't have a legend, and it took 3 years of my advocacy just to get a legend put on it. So maps always need to have legends, and by the way, the Inglewood one here doesn't have a legend either, but you use the one from Tamarack. So what I did send in, which is hopefully helpful, is there was a concerned citizen, used to be on the Planning Commission, who has architecture experience, actually made these maps. So they took the steep slopes data that the city had from King County, and they made it for the whole city. So it's not just Inglewood and Tamarack. You can zoom in on these. It's done in 5 different pages because it mixes around the different layers. But because they exist, you can zoom in. And I will tell you, these steep slopes are very accurate for around where I live. And then the steep slopes that are on the Sammamish property tool now, I'm very grateful for those, but I'm going to call those the very extreme slopes. If you're marked there, you definitely need to look at. So I just wanted to make sure that these maps were available to you. Hopefully they'll be used by staff. Hopefully they'll be given so public could use them too. And it all dovetails into the critical drainage areas that were updated. So thank you for the time.
Thanks. Paul?
Good evening, City Council. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Been involved in all the goings on here since incorporation back in 1999. Tonight, my comment is quite simple on the comp plan, but yet there's a lot of complexity behind this comment. I've got a handout that I'm going to give the clerks and each of you after this is done with some samples to look over. Simply, we need to alter our housing directions in the city. And what I say today has to be said. And take a look at CC and Public and Planning Commission comments from last many years and over time before that. And that's where the record of addressing comprehensive complexity lives. There are 2 sets of false premises we have to deal with. 1, using premise as a structure where we live in, and 2, many policies that led to where we are now on housing direction. I'll talk more about that in a bit. The current comprehensive plan has 2,100 affordable housing units that on its surface is very hard to meet. Also, it plans for roughly 6,200 missing middle houses starting in the next comp plan in the neighborhoods. It's my opinion from a lot of experience that most of the neighborhoods don't want that, and it's unlikely, as was said earlier. Within Sammamish, we have far too many homes, and I'm going to use specific numbers, over 1.5 million, relative to economic, demographic, and workforce housing, not relative to what would sell in the region. We don't have enough affordable houses under 500,000. We don't have enough market rate houses from 500 to $1.4 million, and we don't have enough condos and townhouses high-end for high-end earners who want a different style of housing. All are needed. What are the rough approximations of need? All equally important. 500 and less, about 15%. 500 to 1.4 million, about 70%. And high-end townhomes, about 15%. I'm going to hand out this page after we're done. It's got a lot of examples here. My research found that we're short from 10 to over 20,000 housing units. I'm not advocating for that. I'm advocating for adding 7,000 to the current comp plan, 15% affordable, 85% market rate that doesn't come close to the lowest threshold of our need. It's time to call out false premise that was used in the process to remedy our housing supplies to become authentic to our needs. And to do that, we set legislative gaps, change our comp plan, and then take it to the county for the reconciliation process. That's my comment tonight. I covered a lot. I'll hand this out.
Thank you.
Let's chat specifics.
Great, thank you. All right, and we had no one sign up, correct?
No
All
one
right. Scott, City Manager Report.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, we are next week. I want to remind everyone at the beginning, early of the July 16th council meeting, we will be honoring our former elected officials and community leaders as part of our Jubilee celebration. So looking forward to those joining us starting at 5:30 here in the lobby outside of council chambers for recognizing those folks. So looking forward to everyone joining us for that. We have National Night Out coming out on Tuesday, August 6th. Would encourage everyone to submit your neighborhood get-together to our police department on the website. Just you can type in National Night Out and it'll take you right there. There's a form to fill out, and then whether it is our police or our Eastside Fire and Rescue folks or some version of council and or staff will be swinging by your group if you register. So I would encourage everyone to do that. We look forward to coming out and meeting you in your community and getting a chance to chat a little less formally than we otherwise might. So hopefully folks will take us up on that and join us out on that night. And then want to continue to remind folks about the August 16th Jubilee celebration. It will be here on the plaza at City Hall, where we'll have food trucks. The Sammamish Symphony is joining us, along with a couple of other musical acts. It's going to be a great show. We're going to see the final photo essay contest and our video time capsule at that event. So really looking forward to everyone coming out and joining us. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. All right, council updates. Yeah, Councilmember Lamb.
I have a Public Issues Committee meeting tomorrow. One of the topics is the health effects of nuclear radiation. I sent out the agenda and I'm seeking feedback on that. I need just to go in to the meeting with feedback on whether or not we want to adopt a resolution or endorse what's the program on dismantling nuclear weapons, basically. For context, the state of Washington has the third largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world. And so there's two, one's a doctor, and they're coming to give us a presentation. So if you guys could give me your feedback, it would be great.
All right, anybody else? Any updates? Great. All right, well, good night, everybody. See you next week.